No
think.
kidding.
Yeah, he wouldn't.
Interesting stuff. Are we live there, Dawson? Awesome. You know, before we get started, I wanted to show you what I wore today. This is the, remember this?
Yep.
Yeah, you gave that to me. What's the story behind that?
I got mine on too.
Yeah, can you zoom in on that, Dawson? That hard to do? It's barely, it's kind of dark in here. What's the story behind this? You gave this to me in 2018.
Yep. Actually, these crosses were made out of Iranian rocket shrapnel, 107 millimeter Katyushas, and we brought back all these rocket motors and shrapnel from 81 mortars, and I had this stuff, and it was like, well, what do I do with it? And my chaplain, he was down about. Well, it was about 10 years after we got back. I said, well, you got any ideas what I should do with this stuff? It's just sitting in a tote now. And then he says, yeah, well, maybe make crosses out of it. He said he had one made out of a piece, and he wears it every time he preaches in his church. So then I ended up having I found a guy that was in the guards with me. He's a water jet cutter, and he cuts them. That way all the paint and rust and everything doesn't get burned off if you cut them with heat. And then there's a guy up in the cities here at Preferred Powder Coating. He coats them with matte clear so that they're preserved forever. So
Love it.
Yep.
Were you in southern Iraq then? Is that the
south of Baghdad?
South
we
of
were
Baghdad.
In the Shia area basically.
Same with us. We were Basra, so
yeah. You
southern.
guys were way down south basically.
Way down south.
And then we were basically, I don't know how many miles north of Talil, but it was a convoy support center is what it was, and convoys would stop there, fuel up, get some rest, and then they would take off and go north to Baghdad and points beyond after that. So
yeah, and just like for people's context here, like the Iranians, I mean, they didn't really see a border there, right? It's tribal area, and so they were looking at us as invaders of their land, right? Whereas up in Baghdad, it was more Sunni-led extremists. Certainly when we were there, it was like Sunni on Shia violence, whereas down in southern Iraq, it was Shias mortaring us all the time. I think we had like the summer of rockets. It was just like all the time. Mm-hmm. They say there's no atheists in a foxhole, right? it's a gut check, and it's just unlucky if you get hit by these things because they were very inaccurate, right? They set up on the poo site, right? Appropriately named, and then basically it's going off on a timing device, and it is what it is.
Well, it's about like a bottle rocket,
right? Exactly.
About how they fly out of there, and then we had one land 22 meters from us. So it wouldn't have been for a blast wall between us and where it landed. It probably would have perforated me because that's it's 45 meter kill radius, and we were half that distance, but concrete blast wall stopped all the shrapnel, but it still screwed up a person with TBI because it blew the filaments out of the light bulbs in the hooch we were in. So that shock wave went through everybody.
I remember when I was for whatever reason not leaving the office around the time I was going to, and then we had an attack, and by the time all was clear, I was heading back to the hooch. And there's the impact site right where I was walking. Would have been walking. Who knows? I mean, I could have been a minute either way and still missed it. Right. I was like, that's a humbling feeling. Mm-hmm. All right, so introduce the audience to who you are and why you're here today.
Okay, I'm Command Sergeant Major retired Tom Behrends, and I was invited to be on your show to discuss our governor.
Yeah. Our governor, this guy. I'm no big fan of this guy. Did you know that? We were doing this in 2018, Tom, and I thought I was convinced by what you were saying back then, and it seems like you've been completely correct about everything you said because I've never seen a governor with more challenges and more failures than Tim Walz. First of all, he's faced with a global pandemic. And he completely went the wrong direction. And I think science and data is starting to suggest that lockdowns were not the right way to approach that problem. And now we have a lot of problems because of that. And then he's got the summer of violence, which he completely mishandled. Mm-hmm. And you alleged to this guy abandoning his troops in 2005, but you said this in 2018. And so that's a real leadership challenge. Is this guy's now placed in front of the city's burning down, and where is his leadership in the military where he could pull from to understand how to deal with it? And so, there's a famous quote where Walz says, well, it's on me, like basically it's on me. It's like, yeah, it was on you. So tell people, and before I forget, if you're watching this live, Bridget will read your comments. So if you want to be part of our conversation, just on Facebook or Rumble or YouTube, whichever you're doing, just write on the comment and Bridget will try to interject. So what did Tim Walz do in 2005 that made you think this guy's not a good leader?
Well, basically in the fall of 4, he got selected as Battalion Command Sergeant Major, in the senior enlisted advisor of the colonel, the senior enlisted man in a unit of 500 soldiers. And so he went to guard drill, for a few times in the fall of 04, and March of 05 rolls around, and the brigade gets an order comes out, warning order that prepare to get ready to go to war, because the brigade is gonna go to Iraq basically. And I had been selected to a staff sergeant major job in July of 04. So I was at DeVarty, I was at Division Artillery, and we were doing a warfighter. I was up at Stillwater, and this order comes out, and everybody was just like, well, wow, now we got to get ready for this, and
what we've been preparing for, right?
Yeah, everybody was, most of them were proud that they got picked, because it was like a feather in their hat that the brigade is going to go and do theater security basically, which is like, securing the whole damn country almost. And everybody was, ready to get their affairs in order, and tell their families and their employers that we're going to be going someplace to train for war, and then we're going to be going to war. And this was in March, and I was kind of like, well, I'm not in the brigade, I'm in division. I was just kind of like, well, I guess I got left out of this one, and hopefully down the road I'll be picked, or a unit will be picked and we'll go. And then May rolls around, and we had our May guard drill going on, and all of a sudden, the hush came over the whole crowd basically, because the rumor came out that Walz was in a secret meeting and had walked out and had quit. And everybody was like, who the hell does that? I mean, he's in a unbelievable position. I mean, but it's the, there is no E10, E9 is the highest.
Right.
And he was in this great position, and he just hung up his hat.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of people that never served, or maybe they've been in another service, so they don't understand it. A brigade being roughly 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers, full-birded colonel is the commander of it. So there's a command sergeant major, Julien at that time.
Yep.
That's the top enlisted guy, and then the colonel's the officer or the commander. Then under a brigade, there's a bunch of battalions. And one of those battalions is the battalion, was it 151?
One of the 125.
One of the 125.
Yep, field artillery.
And that's where that's got a lieutenant colonel and a command sergeant major, so also an E9. So
Correct.
Same rank as Julien, as the brigade command sergeant major, same rank, but just, in terms of the chain of command under that guy. So he's the second highest enlisted gentleman in the whole brigade.
Correct.
And so we're not talking about just, a private that decided, I'm not going to go on this deployment. We're talking about a guy that's supposed to be the leader of the enlisted men, which is, 500 in the battalion, something like that?
500, yep.
Yeah. That's a massive, when you first told me that story, because I was an officer, I'm thinking, going on 2 deployments, thinking about the pre-deployment planning, all that stuff, to lose someone so highly ranked would just have been a vacuum. It would have been a gap to try to fill.
Well, especially for the colonel, because the guy is he's the senior enlisted advisor to him. Right. So all things that come from the 500 soldiers out there, look, normally they'll get channeled up through the command sergeant major, and he'll bend the ear of the colonel and say, well, this is going right or this is going wrong. I mean, he's kind of got his pulse on the whole unit out there, and and he's got 500 people that are out there that basically look up to him as the guy we want to follow into battle.
Yeah,
I mean,
you set the standard, right?
Exactly.
That's what a command sergeant major does.
You know, that's it, man. We set uniform standards, and you know, and when I got over there, we had body armor that, you know, was like, we're going to wear everything that the moms and wives sent over for us. I mean, we got, you know, side plates and different things, and it was like, you know, I don't give a damn if it's heavy. We can get through this and hopefully make it home intact in one piece.
Right. So he gets the order. I mean, there's a warning order at that time. He knows he's going overseas, and he sees that there's this opportunity to run for Congress. So it's not like he's got this honorable thing where, you know, wife is, you know, got cancer or dad's on his deathbed. It's, oh, look, this political position. So he resigns and leaves the troops that he's supposedly overseeing. He's abandoning them, and then you fill that void?
Yes, I did. And part of the thing was, on the political side of it, the election wasn't going to be until 2006. Mm-hmm. So in 2005, he's making the decision to maybe get elected. I mean, there was no guarantee that he was going to. He was like, well, I think I can win, he told people. Well, there was no guarantee he was going to win. But he took that political path rather than taking the patriotic path. Mm-hmm. I mean, he threw patriotism completely under the bus and decided that, well, that's going to be too tough. I don't want to do that. And maybe he deep down realized that he wasn't cut out for it, and he realized that, you know, I can't be a leader that's going to do that.
Which, in my opinion, is good, right? Because better you, some other leader, you know, filling that void. But then the idea that he could then run for governor someday.
Well, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and then be the commander in chief of the whole Minnesota Guard.
Right.
I mean, that's the pathetic part about the whole thing. I mean, there's been people that have said, you know, it was just like, God forbid he becomes a governor, and you know, then God forbid he did, you know, but that was the thing back then. I mean, I was a field artillery guy at that time, and I figured, well, you know, the phone's probably going to ring. They're going to probably ask me to take the spot because I was already an E9 already. I was a staff sergeant major. I didn't have the wreaths around my star at that point. But
basically, for people that don't know, just same rank. You're just not in charge of soldiers.
Right.
At that point.
Yeah.
Or at least you're maybe staff soldiers, but not a battalion.
You're just in the position kind of more for your knowledge rather than leading the troops. But I think it was in June. It was early June then when we were up at Ripley and doing the warfighter stuff, and that's when the division CSM and the state CSM, they both took me aside and took me for a walk.
Did you know at that time?
I said, my answer is probably going to be yes, but I said I want to go home and talk to my family first. Mm-hmm. So I went home and, you know, I said, well, this is what's going on.
As if you had a choice in the end, right?
Well,
I guess you could retire abruptly like Walz and just be like that, right?
I could have at that time because, you know, that was kind of one of the things they did with E8s and below. I mean, they could not sign this document called COTTAD, which allowed you to go over 2 years cumulative service back then. Mm-hmm. So it was just kind of this weird paper shuffle. And if they didn't sign, a lot of times they stayed back. But at E9, they were basically told, you know, if you're not going to go, like, I think what Walz thought was that he could quit and then maybe stay in yet. But, you know, the bottom line was, if you don't go and you're asked to.
Well, what makes you say that? That's the first time I heard you say that. So why do you think he could get off the deployment but still stay in?
Well, that might be what he thought. But, you know, the state level people, basically, if you're not going to go, you're going to retire.
Right.
As an E9. That's it. We're not going to keep you around.
Yeah. What's the point in being in the Guard if you're not ready to deploy? It's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Especially at that time frame, because, you know, it's interesting. It was nice meeting you in 2018 and seeing you again. You know, our paths never crossed in the Guard, but there's a reason for that. I was a second lieutenant. I just got commissioned. I was in 4 years enlisted. Get commissioned in May of 2005. So I show up to Alpha Company 2, the 135 in West St. Paul, which I think the IMTO at that time had like 800 people in that unit. It was a goofy unit. And there was two platoons that were getting deployed with you guys. And Pletzen, I can't think of the other guy's name. The LT, they already had their LTs. They already had the 2 platoons full. And I was like, me and Jeff, my buddy Jeff, who showed up as butter bars the same day. I mean, there's nothing more than wanting to get on that deployment. But we hadn't even been to IOBC down in Benning yet. And it's like, oh, man, we got to sit that one out. So you guys end up getting deployed, and it's supposed to be, I almost said traditional deployment, but what the hell does that mean in 2005? By the time I went to Iraq, 2 deployments later, it was maybe some bit of tradition. But you end up right there at a critical time during the surge.
Right.
And so it becomes the longest deployment in modern day combat. It's 22 total months, 16 months overseas in Iraq, which is crazy. So Tim Walz dodges a deployment that ends up being historic. Lots of casualties, record things. I think you guys set like a record for amount of miles covered, cleared IEDs, all that kind of stuff. A historic deployment, and he abandoned you guys on that one. So what were the, maybe in hindsight, I guess, I don't know how much this was a topic of conversation on deployment. Maybe it was initially, but after the deployment, was this something that was discussed, or was this not until this guy decided to run for governor where this got out a little bit more?
Well, it did. It was brought up over there, but part of the problem you have when you're on active duty is you're bound by regulation to not get into the political process, really. So, I mean, I brought it up to my colonel, too. I mean, he was back here campaigning, and he was retired command sergeant major this and 24 years, just blah, blah, about like he is now, like at a debate, just blah, 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 and it was just like, God, can you just shut the hell up? I mean, you didn't retire as a command sergeant major. You basically dropped out of the course, and you didn't do your 2 years after getting the course done. You literally did a few guard drills, and you're acting like you're a CSM. I mean, it's this ridiculous.
Yeah, that's something I don't think a lot of people understand. You certainly seem to be a little bit more peeved about that than the average guy, but I think you got something there. So correct me if I'm wrong, because they didn't have conditional promotions as officers.
Right.
I would have loved that. That would have been nice. I was doing the work of major in Iraq. If you fill the position, because, the Army is bureaucratic like any corporation or any government agency. It's bureaucratic, so there's like a time and grade and all that kind of stuff. But if you fill a position on a deployment, even if you don't meet those requirements initially, you could be conditionally promoted to a new rank. So was that what happened with Tim Walz? Was he conditionally promoted to command sergeant major to fill that position?
No, it's different in the E9 realm because there's a school that literally takes 2 years to complete.
So he would have been a sergeant major regardless.
Right. Yeah. As far as getting conditionally promoted in the fall of 4, and that he was already enrolled in the United States Army Sergeant Major's Academy, and they've got like
is that because they're doing like distance learning?
Yeah, they're doing. Yep. There's more or less 2 years worth of correspondence course stuff, and then you do speeches to another command sergeant major back here, and he grades you, and you do tests, and you get all of this stuff done ahead of time, and then you have a 2 week course down in Fort Bliss, which is like your resident phase of it, and then that's where everything comes together, and then at the end of that you graduate from it. And once you graduate, since it's literally I don't know how many college credits, it's almost a 2-year degree itself by the time you get done with the academy. So the Army's got a lot of money invested in you, so you've got a form which that you sign and you put in 2 years after you graduate in order for it to stick as retirement.
Sure.
So it's called the Statements of Agreement and Certification, and it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's I understand, and I've been counseled, and I understand that if I'm promoted, the promotion is conditioned upon your graduation from it, and I've read and understand. I mean, it's all here. Everybody signs this. Every person that goes to the school. And when he dropped out, I reached out to the division command sergeant major. Then I said, "What is this guy? This guy's running around campaigning as like he's a retired command sergeant major." And he said he can really only call himself a retired first sergeant or master sergeant, whichever one he was.
Was
Because
he a first
said-
sergeant at one point?
Yeah, he was first sergeant before he did.
So he was a staff position.
Yeah,
master sergeant.
so basically, he's just been lying about this forever, for political gain is what it boils down to. So, when I talked to the division CSM, he was just, when you don't fulfill the conditions, it's null and void, like it never happened. It's just, it's gone.
Well, you're right, because, your whole reason of getting promoted to sergeant major is to be on this deployment, essentially, is to be the lead enlisted guy for this battalion, which is getting deployed. And so when you drop out of that position, to call yourself that rank seems ridiculous to me. Dawson, pull up the campaign site for Tim Walz. This is today what he's got on his site. So if you go to the About section about Meet Tim,
Right.
scroll down, keep going down. It's right there. Highlight that last paragraph. It says, Command Sergeant Major Walz, there you go. My eyes are starting to get bad. Walz retired from the 125th Field Artillery Battalion. When he retired, Tim was the highest ranking enlisted National Guard soldier in southern Minnesota. How does that make you feel seeing that?
Well, at the top of it, it starts out with the Nebraska stuff. And we haven't been able to track the evidence down at this point, but I went to first sergeant school in 1995 with a guy that was out in Nebraska. He went to Shadron State College, and he was actually Tim's first sergeant. When it doesn't say this on his website, and I've never seen it anywhere, he worked full time for the National Guard. And this was right around when he got his DWI out there. And there's things said about him being asked by the principal of the school not to resign and whatever. I have found no mention of him in his campaign stuff that he was a full-time soldier in the Nebraska Guard. This first sergeant said that he actually would work till noon as full-time in the Guard Armory, and then he'd go teach school in the afternoon. My gut feeling, and I haven't found the evidence yet, and people have been digging, and my first sergeant out there kind of went radio silence on me now, so I think I hit the nail on the head. I think he got fired from his full-time position out in Nebraska. He's got on there that he was 1989 Soldier of the Year or whatever, but when this DWI thing hit, I think he got canned, and then lo and behold, he moves to Minnesota and starts teaching up here then. And on the
And then
bottom,
eventually becomes the damn governor.
right, and
I love politics.
part of the thing on the bottom of that, then him saying Command Sergeant Major, it's like I wrote in my letter to the editor out there. It's like I could call myself Captain Kangaroo if I want. The First Amendment right allows me to lie if I want.
Actually, there is a law in Minnesota. you probably don't know this. There's a law in
I
Minnesota.
can't be Captain Kangaroo.
No, you can't lie. Candidates can't lie about something.
Oh,
yeah, it's like 211B. That's the statute. I can't think of what the subdivision is, but yeah, you can't make false statements
Right.
running for office.
And that was the thing with.
But this is like one of those gray areas because at one point he was at the command sergeant major rank, conditional upon him finishing it, conditional upon him being in that position with the battalion, which was deploying. So it's like that gray area. It's like,
right.
You can, a court might say, well, you're making the statements in it. We could deem it accurate, but it's
You're
like,
missing one word in there.
yeah,
though.
but
I mean,
here's a peer, someone who's got a stake in this, like you, who's saying that's a bullshit statement there.
Well, he goes to and he's done this all the way back to 18. He goes to the Minnesota National Guard Public Affairs Office, and he finds somebody there that, has no knowledge about the Command Sergeant Major school or the
Right.
conditional promotion, and then he gets some statement like, well, he can say that he served as a Command Sergeant Major.
Yeah.
And it's like Command Sergeant Major Hers said. It's just like he's got this mythical rank out there that he tries to hang on to. He tries to hang on to the coattails of people that actually served in a position and finished the school, and some of them died in Iraq or Afghanistan or other places, and they did the whole works. I mean, that's the problem that he's out there. He's trying to feather his nest with other people's accomplishments, and then on the bottom of that statement, it says he was the highest ranking NCO in southern Minnesota. Well, like Paul Herr said, well, what about Tom Behrens? But on the other hand, you got 2 of the 135 headquartered in Mankato, and they've got a command center. Like I wrote in my documents over this last couple months, they had a real one in there.
Tom Erickson?
Yeah, I don't know who it actually was.
He was with us in Kosovo. Once
it very well could have been,
but
I mean,
battalion ended up being like 2,000 people. Who knows?
So his statement right there is a damn lie,
Right.
because he was a conditionally promoted command sergeant major, and there was another one in southern Minnesota that actually was one, and he pulls this statement out like, well, I was the only one down there. Well, you're wrong. I mean, you weren't. I mean,
Right.
It's just.
But who would accuse him of knowing what's going on in Rocks and Cows territory, right? So what's fascinating to me about this, and I'm going to shit on you just a little bit, but you'll understand it. The Guard changed significantly in the 2003-04 era, right? And I would argue maybe 05 was a real wake-up point. But when I came over to the Minnesota Guard in 05, it was a very professional organization. I come from Wisconsin, which was the good old boy system, barbecues at AT. It just was a different Guard. And that's what Tim Walz grew up in, and so did you, because obviously you guys were in the same peer group. So he dodged his deployment. He didn't get to see the Guard for what it is today, which is really, in many regards, in my opinion, like the reserves for the Army. Many people don't know this, but the Army Reserves doesn't have combat units in it. So I don't know what kind of reserve for the active duty Army the Reserves really is if it doesn't have the combat units like the Guard does. So he misses this deployment, and then he comes back, and this is back in the summer of violence, and says something about 19-year-old cooks. The Guard couldn't possibly respond to this because they're 19-year-old cooks. And I remember seeing this. I'm like, well, I know a lot of people. I still have a lot of friends, and they're getting higher up in the ranks now. I've been out for a while, who talked about this deployment status during the summer of violence, the time where Tim Walz was hesitant to bring in the Guard. I think it was 3 or 4 days into the summer of violence before he even called these guys up. So he makes this comment on 19-year-old cooks. And do we have this video ready to go, Dawson? I want to play this video because he then doubles down on this in his basically one and only televised debate with Scott Jensen. Do you have that? Okay, let's go ahead and play that.
I was proud of the first responders. You may not be, but I was. This was an incredibly difficult and unprecedented incident. There was no precedence for it before, and I want to just be clear. I have stood with the National Guard for 24 years. I'm proud of that work, that expertise that I brings to it. No matter how much I slandered by Scott, it doesn't change the fact to me. I don't care what he says about me. I care what he says about the folks who are out there doing this work, that put a plan together to deal with an unprecedented situation, to restore order in
Thank you, Governor Walz.
He means his 19-year-old cooks is what he's referring to.
We have to
Can I
move on
clarify
now.
that? Would you like to have that clarified?
Please.
The question I made on this, of being a soldier and being in this, is that each of us has a military occupational specialty. And Scott, like so many things, took a clip of where I said, one of the problems is in getting folks in right away. We have troops deployed all over the world. We have military occupational specialties that are trained for this. We have a small percentage of the National Guard that is trained for civil defense, not urban warfare, civil defense. And I made the case that some of us are artillerymen, some of us are pilots, some of us are ply chiefs, and some of us are newly enlisted 19-year-olds in cooks or food service. It's an important part of what we do. Having a deep understanding of the military's role and then trying to make the claim that this is somehow slanderous of someone who doesn't understand that. That's why making the case in this. I will be the first to tell you.
Governor Walz,
not everything could go perfectly.
We do have to move on.
Okay.
I see. That's how the Rocks and Cows, too, then go. Okay, the 19-year-olds and the
And
Rocks and Cows.
we do have to move along to the next question.
I don't think Jensen stuck the landing on the Rocks and Cows, but it's a good point what he's trying to make, because that's just how he looks at things. He's kind of, for not being a East Coast elite liberal, he is, and basically he identifies as an East Coast elite liberal. That's the way I look at Tim Walz. But what's fascinating to me is he's like, well, let me clarify it. And I thought he just sounded worse by clarifying it. Like, I know the National Guard. I know what their capabilities are. Doesn't seem like he understands what these guys are capable of doing.
Not at all. I mean, when you look at that's what I wrote throughout this fall, is that you've got a governor that don't even have a clue what the capabilities of his National Guard that he's in charge of is, or supposed to be in charge of. I mean, there are, I don't even know what the percentage of it is, but I mean, it's got to be well over 50% are combat hardened people that were in combat that have came back. Right. And he's acting like, well, just because your MOS is artillery or something, then you can't be. Yeah, it's urban warfare.
Was your mission artillery over in Iraq? I mean, come on.
No, it wasn't.
I was an infantry soldier, and other than maybe a couple of recons in Kosovo, most of mine was riot control.
Right.
Like I know riot control very well. I was a what the hell's the term I'm looking for? The reserve. I'm having a brain fart here. But we also were in charge of shit got out of hand.
Right.
Just
quick reaction force.
Yeah, QRF.
Yep.
I was always up in the airfield getting briefs every morning because we were ready to spin up in the Blackhawks to go help out whatever other unit needed us. But yeah, I mean, there's not just 2-135 trained up in this. I mean, you guys, 1st Brigade, which, by the way, 1st Brigade then deployed in 2011 to Kuwait. I mean, these guys know what the hell they're doing.
Well, exactly.
It's a ridiculous statement.
It disparages the people that are in the military. Right. I mean, I was on radio with, I can't remember, the Oz, I think was the guy's name, out of St. Cloud, and this was right after this 19-year-old cook came. I mean, he was very clear that that's what he thought the whole damn National Guard was.
Yeah.
Was just a bunch of 19-year-old cooks that are incapable of doing anything.
Right.
I think that's why he sat there and sputtered. And maybe he looked in the mirror and thought, well, I wouldn't want to do it. Maybe they don't want to either.
Right.
But, he sputtered around for days, not calling them out. And, that was my first thing I said to the guys on that show was like, here's a big shout out to all the 19-year-old cooks out there.
Right.
I mean, because they deserve a pat on the back. I mean, it wasn't like even if they were a cook, they were in, a lot of them were in combat and they were doing things that they're not their MOS specialty or whatever. But,
right.
Him coming up with that whole thing was I was just disgusted because the Chandler City got hit by a tornado in '92, I believe it was, and got wiped out. And we didn't have cell phones back then, and we had a phone tree. They literally would call, they'd call, the first sergeant would call the platoon sergeants, and it just went down, and you got a hold of people. And I think it hit like at 5, and by nightfall, we had the town secured, kept everybody out of the whole perimeter, and here he is saying you can't just call them up. It's like, he could have called up the MPs out of the cities, the 205th, I think they are.
Yeah, is that Stillwater?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple hundred there probably, or at least 100. Yeah. They'd have been here on the turn of a dime and started the security process, and then all of a sudden other units would have came in. I was just like, what? This guy is incapable of even knowing what the Guard he was in 24 years. He doesn't even know what they can even do.
And this is why I think the story is so interesting, is because he's part of the old guard. And let's just be honest, it was barbecues at AT.
Exactly.
It wasn't a wartime guard. And I mean, there's relative peace in the 90s. 2001 hits, this terrorist attacks, and I remember the change because I was in just right before 9/11. It was just a total mood shift.
Absolutely. I mean, that was just I had retired in 2000. My mom and dad were getting older. My kids were young, and you needed to have 2-year college degree to even enroll in the academy at that point. So I was like, well, I'm first sergeant. I've been that 5 years. I got my 20. I'm going to retire. And then I ran into the first sergeant one time, the guy that took my position, and he was like, well, I'm going to retire. And I was like, well, hell, maybe I'll get back in. This was in 2002.
Yeah.
I never really, it wasn't like I did it because I wanted to be patriotic or whatever. Maybe I did deep down.
We all
but
did.
I just looked at, okay, there's my soldiers I trained with for 20 years. If they're going to go somewhere, I want to go with them.
Right.
That's what I felt like. And then, that's kind of what it turned into. But, he was, when you look at what went on in the 90s and command sergeant majors, they could hang around for a long time.
Right.
And a lot of the core people that went up high in rank a lot of them were school teachers,
right?
Because you had summer AT, they weren't working anyway, and they could take their a 2-week AT, and there was several of them that were in command sergeant major positions, and and senior officer ranks too, because it was, pretty convenient. It was a pain in the ass for me as a farmer because I had to,
Right.
stop planting or stop spraying to go to AT, annual training.
Right.
But that was part of what happened with Walz. I mean, there was a bunch of people that were school teachers that were above him that were like, well, let's get another teacher in there, I think. And nothing against teachers, but there, I was biased to farmers and teachers were biased to teachers. And that's just how things kind of, like you said, at that time frame, there was stuff like that went on.
He missed this new guard, this new
Right.
this new mission that they were called upon, and what really hit me is I'm very hesitant. I would never want to activate the National Guard. It seemed very obvious to me, though, that was the necessity. Was not just that State Patrol and all those resources on the ground, because it was utter chaos in the Twin Cities, right? And the left. I mean, this is the violence of the left too. They always want to make January 6th to be the big issue. It's like, this is the violence of the left, the Black Lives Matter outfits that really became violent as a result of what happened to George Floyd, and then follow on things, after that. So there needed to be some kind of command and control. And what was really interesting watching this happen is it seemed like Tim Walz was lacking in that department. And I always think about, Hillary Clinton, for instance, in Benghazi. Was that 2000? Is that 2012? When is that, Benghazi? 2012, somewhere in there?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, I mean, they just fumbled that, right? It was a complete fumble. And they lied about it, too. They said this was just some spontaneous riot and it was planned and all that kind of stuff. And you think about, why would Hillary Clinton know what to do in that situation? When has she, in her resume, ever been in a position to make those kind of key decisions in a moment like that, a very violent moment? And it's just not in her resume because she has a political resume. Same thing with Tim Walz is what I thought about it. This guy did not go overseas. He did not, if he was left-hand man to, was Colby your,
Right.
yeah, commander then? So he would have saw this kind of stuff. I'm sure there was a, what's a battalion, we call it a DACA division. What's the operations floor in a battalion? Whatever it is.
The TOC.
The TOC,
Yeah.
sorry. See, my memory's starting to go.
That happens.
Yeah. Well, my last billets was division, unfortunate. So it's like I now know that level. So I got to see the real politics of the Army. But, he would have been there. He would have seen something like that in his career, and I don't think he missed that key piece.
Well, what he did see was what went on in Europe when he was in Italy, and that, basically we were, falling in and helping secure the bases that were there. That was another thing that he kind of blew that into some weird political statement, that his unit was replacing that unit so they could go to Afghanistan, and it was like the base he was on was the 173rd Airborne, and they were in Iraq. But it was just like there was this weird. Okay, we can't say Iraq. We got to make it sound like it's Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan. I mean, this was in his literature back in when he was running for Congress back then. It was like, what are you trying to?
Was OEF? Is that what he was saying?
Well, it was Operation Enduring Freedom, but he was saying
he was part of the.
He was saying that the unit went to Afghanistan, which they didn't. They were in Iraq. It was just this weird. He didn't want to say, well, they were going to Iraq, and that's where they were at, was in Iraq. I mean, he tried to make it sound like they were in Afghanistan just because of some.
That's like inflated valor. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
the term.
yeah.
Stolen valor is also inflated valor.
Well, exactly. Yeah, but that's the bottom line with what he was doing there, and that was the thing that you're absolutely right there when it comes to him being incompetent, because his background as a educator, as a football coach, as an artilleryman, whatever, and cutting his career off at 24 years, he didn't get to see what went on in our tactical operations center.
Right.
He didn't get to see that this is the person you should talk to about getting this riot under control. I mean, he just hid under the desk right here. Is probably what
I
he
remember
did.
there was a news conference with General John Jensen. I guess it would have been Major General John Jensen at that time. That was my two-up boss in Iraq. Great officer. And Jensen didn't want to fully throw Walz under the bus, but alluded to the fact that there was really no command and control from the governor. The guard was ready to go because he was overseeing the guard.
I
that
watched
time.
that myself also.
Is that how you took it?
I just saw he was literally just frustrated because he
Yeah.
was like, here we are, we're ready to go. And the Minnesota Guard's motto was always ready. They were ready. And he was like, you didn't even sit, more or less, you didn't sit down and talk to me, see what our capabilities were. You didn't, all Walz would have had to do was say, hey, General, what can we do? And, how fast can we do it?
What can I do to support you guys in this mission? If I say go, because he's
Instead
got to
of-
make the decision, but I'm gonna say go. Tell me how we're gonna get it done, because you don't want him doing more than that. You want the command structure figuring that out.
Well, exactly. But, that's part of the problem I think that he's got is, he wants to be the king. He wants to be the guy making the decisions and,
So it's interesting you bring that up. So and it's so fun chatting with you because we haven't talked since 2018. There was the leadership challenge in March of 2020 when all of a sudden we were facing a global pandemic. And I remember I would say this to people. I go, it seems to me there's this sense from politicians that leadership means that you're tyrannical, that you carry this stick and you tell people what to do. And it's like, that's not real leadership. Leadership is not telling people what to do. It's to inspire people to do the right thing or to move along with the mission. And that's exactly the approach Governor Walz took. Was he didn't mind telling people exactly what to do. In fact, if you don't do what he says, you're going to jail for 90 days or get a $1,000 fine, which was in his lockdown orders, and it was in his business closures. And that was the way he did. And I must just not be that astute on the Minnesota Constitution. Apparently, there's a phrase in there that has something called the freedom dial, where you can go up and down with the freedom dial. Have you ever seen this?
Well, if you know the governor and you get to have a conversation with him in the back room of the Capitol, then you could keep your candy store open. But But if
liquor
you're
stores.
Brown Shoe Fit Company down in Worthington, Minnesota, you got to shut your door while Walmart sells shoes to the people in the packing plant, and it's like it just made no sense.
And at this point, I think we have to be honest that lockdowns were a massive failure. It's led to high inflation because they were just paying people to sit at home and then bailing out businesses. The mask mandate, all these stuff failed. But this is the approach that he took. So his leadership in quotations, is to tell people what to do on the political side. But when push comes to shove and you're actually in a position where you need command and control of real forces, I hate to say military forces because I don't like to say that in the civilian aspect, but in the regard to what was happening in the summer violence, it came down to that. We needed state patrol, police, and military presence on the ground to stop the out-of-control violence. And he just was absent. There's a famous video of, I think it was KARE 11, complaining about how they haven't heard back from the governor yet.
Where is he? Yeah.
I don't. Did you ever watch Jacob Fry's infamous 1 a.m. press conference? I think on the first day of violence. It reminded me of like this JROTC cadet just freaking out on his first. They just like he didn't know what to do.
He got thrown under the bus by his governor.
He got thrown under the bus.
Getting called an abject failure. So I suppose he felt like
But why would Jacob Fry know what to do? Why would Tim Walz know what to do? These guys, they're political animals.
Yeah.
I think Tim Walz cares more about what the gender is of the next general in the Minnesota Army National Guard than the readiness and the preparation to quell any kind of violence.
Or which statue he's going to get tore down without getting any charges on it. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Right.
But that part of what his leadership is, though, his style, is even like the nursing home lockdowns. I mean, he literally went after what Governor Cuomo did in New York, followed the same damn thing, basically, just my niece was up here as a nursing home worker back then. And, the one wing was for the residents and the other wing was for all the ones coming back from the hospital. And they literally were just carrying body bags out of there. I mean, it affected, that's what I said, these lockdowns and things that we haven't seen the end of this yet.
Right.
There's going to be an awful lot of mental stress and things. I mean, it really affected her because it was like, this was, you're bringing infected patients back into this home and then everybody's getting it.
Yeah, I know.
And then he buys a morgue, as one of his first things I'm going to have this many people die, so we got to get this thing out there. I mean, I don't even.
Well, he puts COVID positive patients in nursing homes. At that point, we knew that the people dying from COVID is the elderly. Meanwhile, he shuts down schools, and we just had, I think it was yesterday, the story came out where math scores have dropped to like an all-time low in Minnesota.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, there's huge impacts, and no one wants to take blame for this too. Walz clearly has I would have some respect for Tim Walz if he just didn't run again, because he realized his lack of failure.
Well, he should have done that back when he should have done that back when he quit the National Guard. I mean, anybody with any backbone would have basically said, "I'm just going to go crawl under a rock and I'm going to hide." And I don't want to,
It's pretty easy to find rocks in his old congressional district, right?
Rocks and
Right
cows.
out there in the cow pastures.
But I mean, he literally should have quit back then, because it was like, you bailed out on everybody, and you just go retire on the lake or go do something. Don't, instead he just doubled down and went the other way.
Well, because now he wants to lead us politically, and I don't look
Right.
at these guys as leaders. I mean, I
No,
think these
hell
politicians are they're serving themselves.
There are some that are, but
They're rare.
it is rare. I mean, most of the time they're just up there tooting their own horn, and
Exactly.
And I saw that with Tim back when he was first sergeant. We'd have staff call, and it was almost like he brought his little soapbox in there and stood up on it, and it was just blah blah. It was just like, God, I told. Me and the other first sergeant would sit there and would be like, God, does he ever just shut up? Well, you see what he's like now when he gives an answer. It's just, just this rambling
Did he have anger issues back then? Because he's got real anger issues.
Yeah,
see it all
not
the
that I
time.
really ever saw, because I really only remember 2 times, when I really interacted with him a little bit. I mean, I never really ever talked to the guy. It was just like, he's just a babbling idiot. I mean, I'd rather.
Now he's governor.
Yeah, how's that work?
It happens all the time. I mean, look at these doofuses that run for these offices. I mean, look who our president is right now. Like, my God, that's the commander in chief.
Well,
Oh my God.
that's a whole nother program.
Yeah. Well, him and Tim Walz are 2 peas in a pod. I mean,
Well,
these guys
really,
are the same. I mean,
yeah.
And that's what the modern Democrat Party is too. You come from the old school Democrat region of CD1. It's not like that anymore. These guys are nuts, and that's Tim Walz too. I thought in 2018, okay, this Tim Walz. I like Jeff Johnson. I knew him personally. He's a great guy. Tim Walz is not the scariest governor candidate. I'm trying to think. Murphy was running back then. I'm sure there was more scary people running for governor. Tim Walz seemed like this moderate to me. No, this guy is the modern Democrat. Identity politics. Move far to the left as possible. Constitution be damned. Take your gun rights. I don't give a shit about First Amendment. This guy's terrible.
Well, that's the thing with it. It's like, I think Ronald Reagan said it, that he's so far left, he's left the country.
Right.
And the thing with Tim, he's pretty crafty on the political side of stuff. I mean, he knows what people in southern Minnesota probably want to hear. He knows when he goes to a big fundraiser in the cities and says rocks and cows, and everybody laughs of all the hicks that live out in the country, that he's saying what they want to hear, and he probably can feel that vibe, in his heart or soul somewhere.
Well, his policies led to the largest wealth transfer in Minnesota history, shutting down the small businesses in Roxanne-Cow, just crushed the small towns. Not as much southern Minnesota, which is ag-based, but certainly northern Minnesota, which is, the taverns and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Just run them in the ground to the point where they can't even open again.
Right.
I mean...
And then, of course, a lot of liquor stores are muni liquor stores, so that didn't matter, right?
Well, yeah, the city got more money to spend.
Yeah, but Target and Walmart, all those guys, all the big corporations opened right up.
Well, and that was the thing with him, like you said, though. You in 18, when you kind of look at him and you think, yeah, he's kind of moderate maybe or whatever, and he's been this way his whole damn career. He's
right. Deep
down, he's as left as any of the Pelosi, Biden, Kamala Harris, whatever. I mean, right down the line. But he gets you know, oh, I'm a pheasant hunter. Look at me, you know, whatever. And
No, I always love that. I love
you know,
the,
he
the
gets-
nice spick and span blaze orange from those politicians. And they're,
You know, here I am
Right
driving
there,
around
yep.
my old Scout. You know,
Yep.
I'm an old hick from Nebraska type thing, and
Yep.
you know, wearing his flannel plaid. You know, and it's just, you know, some people look at it like, well, he's down to earth. You know, but in all reality, I mean, he wants to completely turn this into California clean energy mandate crap that it don't work out there, and it sure as hell ain't gonna work here. I mean,
but we're all one Minnesota, Tom. Don't
Right.
you know?
Well,
That's
that-
the thing that bugs me is that's his motto of his campaign. We're one Minnesota. Coming from the guy that said there's essential and non-essential workers. That there's the cities and there's rocks and cows territory. And this asshole says, "Hey, it's one Minnesota." Like no one believes you.
and I'm glad you brought that up because at the end of my letter to the editor that I'm trying to get out to every paper in the state, I used his phrase.
That's your letter to the editor. That's like 20 pages long.
Well, it's
They're not
big
gonna
font,
publish
so I
that.
could read it if I had to.
No, gotcha.
I squeezed it down to 2 pages, but one Minnesota united against Walz.
Yeah, I wish. It's unfortunate, but you know, there's a base for Tim Walz because there's people still getting their booster shots, and there's people driving around in cars alone with masks on. So there is still a base for Tim Walz. There's no doubt about it.
And I saw one of them on the way up here when I was like, you know, you can't make that up.
What do
you're
you
in
do?
your car alone and you're driving with a mask on. I mean, really, I mean, I just can't get it. But
It's interesting too, like the people that like Tim Walz doesn't wear masks anymore. Hey, did you see that stupid? He's got that green wool mask too. Did you see that? What an asshole! Like looking like he's wearing the wool blanket.
yeah,
I got somebody made a winter coat out of it, kind of like a poncho almost with a hoodie out of a wool blanket. It's my favorite garment now. I wear it ice fishing. I throw like a little down jacket under it, and then that's my whole cover. Wind barely goes through it. Because after they came out with those modular sleeping bags, you know, 2005, who the hell wanted to use one of those wool blankets anymore?
Yeah,
those
that
itchy
was-
things. We all had them, right?
oh yeah. Well, and that was you talking about that mask. I mean, I went on a Combat Veteran Motorcycle Association ride, and I had them. We had to wear masks when we went in these bars and stuff. You know, it was just weird, and then wear it in there. But then when you're drinking, you could take it off and
Science.
You know, just follow. I'm going to turn the dial a little bit, whatever. But I had I love Walz written on the outside of my mask, and then the one biker, he looked at me and he was just like, "What are you trying to do? Get beat up?"
Yeah, there's a lot of people that didn't like Tim Walz at that point.
But that was, you know, it was so ridiculous. Like, you know, going and get a haircut, and I was like, "Well, can you trim my eyebrows?" No, I can't because the state mandate says
Yeah.
you can't trim your. It's just the stuff was just ridiculous.
Well, to me as a veteran, it's like we fought against the stuff that guy was doing. You know, there's a part in our Constitution that says one person of a branch can't take over the powers of another branch, and he was making laws essentially.
Right. Well, that's
So is
he
it
was
clear
being a
but-
dictator.
Yeah, so it's a clear violation of the Minnesota Constitution, something that he swore to uphold and defend. Like from a veteran perspective, I'm like, how does this guy have any veteran support? We were chatting about this the other day, weren't we? The letter of 30 people that's
Yeah.
veterans that support him, and what was it, like 80% Navy and like junior enlisted guys? It's like
Right,
none of
and-
his peers.
Well, and then there's two guys on two guard people, and one of them's North Dakota, and then the other one, you know, is what just says National Guard. But I'm not going to recognize the name anyway. But my guess is it's not somebody from the 125.
Right.
I mean, I got a bunch of guys now that, you know, I don't know how many are on. There's about a dozen of them, I suppose, that were all in. I think most of them were in the forward observer bunch, the FIST guys.
Yeah.
And they're on this thing. They're just they want to get the word spread out there, and you know, I mean, it's like if we put the flag up and said here's the group for Veterans Against Walz,
Yeah.
I think the whole cities would be flooded because they're literally. I mean, there are some. I mean, granted, I'm not going to say he doesn't have some following out there. I mean, obviously, and that's what I said in my letter to the editor about these veterans too. Is like, well, thank you for your service, but doesn't it puzzle you that there's nobody on your list that served with him?
Right.
You know, I mean, you've got this hodgepodge of people from all over, and you know, granted, a lot of them probably don't know the whole story.
Well, and there's a bunch that were like veterans on there. Like I think Rob Eklund, who's a legislator, You know, he's probably a veteran from, I don't think he's as old as Vietnam, but probably the 80s or 90s.
Right.
It's like, you know, you're just selling your veteran status at this point. It's not,
Right.
it has nothing to do with serving with the guy and saying something.
Well, and Dan Feehan is on there. I mean,
Feehan, there you go, another great point.
You know, he ran first district, you know, on the
Right.
DFL side, and you know, it's just it's sad that a guy's got to get to the point where he grabs at straws like that. I mean,
Right.
if he would have served honorably, you know, he did serve honorably for 24 years basically. I would guess, but then he gets to the point
Maybe
where,
not. Maybe with
well,
that
maybe
Nebraska
not, maybe
thing.
nobody really knows. You
Yeah,
know,
the
but-
Dewey.
yeah, but you know that's it. At the end of the whole thing, then you quit when it's time to go, and the nation calls. And
I just can't imagine ending my career on that. You know.
could you imagine a Marine sergeant major doing that, or a chief master sergeant in the Air Force that when the ball went up and it was like, okay, it's time to go. We're gonna go.
Right.
And then they quit. I mean, what the hell would the unit think of them, or you know, anybody in Army or, you know, Coast Guard or Space Force or anything? I mean, you get the E9 position, and
Yeah, I
your
mean-
nation wants you to go to war. I mean, you go. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, my enlisted unit got deployed, I think it was 04, and I had already been ROTC. I was on my senior ROTC. It was just a 2-year program. Mm-hmm. Oh, that was tough on me. Like, you know, the guys were like, well, you're not part of us anymore.
Right.
It's like, it's rough. Now, obviously, I was becoming an infantry officer. I knew I was going eventually, so it's not like I was dodging anything, but it's like, it's so tough. I can't imagine facing these guys again, and that's probably why there's none of those guys on that list.
Yeah. Well, that very well could be. I mean, there's a
Especially
couple
when, especially when you guys set record longest deployment ever. I mean, this was
Yeah.
not an easy deployment, and you guys get screwed afterwards too. I think was your time off, or what was that? You had a big issue where the Congress had to fix it too.
Yeah, the leave we
leave,
had
yeah.
was they had this extra leave basically. If you went over so many days, well, it ended up being years for us. but
Yeah.
if it ended up going over that, then they doubled your leave then.
Yep.
And then, God, what the hell was the name of it? It was an acronym.
I know what you're
typical
talking about,
Army
yeah.
acronym. But they were going to give us this extra leave. Well, then they released us off active duty at Fort McCoy. So then we were off active, and in order to pay us our leave, technically you needed to be on active duty yet to get your leave all straightened out, and then, you know, pull the plug and you're off active.
Right.
Well, then that was another thing that he put. He was just like, well, I got that leave for everybody, whatever. And it was like, you were one of a small contingent of people that I mean, you're one small cog in the whole in the whole thing. And the other bad part about that is they took 40% tax right off the top of the damn thing. So it was like, you know, it was just, okay, here's your kick in the ass. You get your
Right.
half of your money basically.
Right.
But you know, that was when I got back and we had a parade in Worthington too. He came scurrying over there, you know,
Did
and
he really? Ooh.
over to me, and he was like, well, you know, we're gonna pass a bill where you can't go more than 2 years or whatever. And I'm like, we're at war. I said,
Yeah.
you're gonna okay, we're gonna pull the plug and we're gonna pull you out of there because your 2 years is up. What the hell would the World War II veterans thought of that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just bullshit. And then after he heard my comment, then he went and talked to the junior guys to try to bullshit him or whatever. But it's like,
Yeah.
you know, what the hell? You're not, you know, that's just
I can only imagine the reaction people had for this guy. You know, and I've seen it. I've seen the guys that weren't on deployments, and you get back, and you're kind of an outsider. It sucks.
Well, and the one lady that, you know, there was an article in the Star Tribune, and then there, you know, she was in, I think she was in the Air Guard, and then she was on his side that, well, you can't, you know, you don't know when you're going to go, and you know, I was in a unit, and then I transferred, and then that unit left, and she was trying to compare that to what Walz did, and I was just like, no, that has no comparison. I said, you know, that does happen, and the people that do transfer, they look back at that other unit like, God, I wish I was there.
Yeah.
Those are all my people, and they're going, and I'm back here. But that ain't what happened with Walz. I mean, he pulled the plug and slithered out the door like a snake, and then he was gone. I mean, and
Yeah.
never, you know, there wasn't no retirement party. There was no passing of the baton to me and saying, here's who your first sergeants are.
Which is usually what happens,
Here's
right.
the issues in the battalion.
Yep.
You know, the colonel, you know, he likes to have a cigar and a thing of brandy at the end of the day, or any of that crap. There was no cake ordered for him.
Yeah.
There was nothing.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
they
actually
usually
a
have a
great
change
point.
of the change the responsibility ceremony,
Yeah.
like I did when I handed it over to Joe Eustace. I mean, we did our thing. I handed him a bunch of papers. I said, "Here's a document I found: duties and responsibilities of the command sergeant major." And he's like, "Wow, this is really good to get." And I go, "Yeah, I never got one.
Right.
I mean, I had to find this shit myself." And
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of it that way.
yeah,
It just shows how
he was
abruptly
gone
he
like a
left.
wisp of smoke is the best way to put it.
And we all know why. All right, Dawson, do we have any comments that we need to read before we sign off? Nothing, Bridget? Okay. No, okay. So I want to leave the audience with this. What do you want them to know about Tim Walz?
The
voter.
audience?
Tell the voter.
Well, I would have to say that the banners that have been out there that Walz failed is probably the best, best term that's out there for him. I mean, he's lied and deceived people for political gain for just years, and he never should have got in office to begin with. I mean, back then he said that he reenlisted for 4 years and just magically got out before the unit was deploying, and even now when he finally made a comment when I called him out with Dr. Jensen at a press conference, he is like he's proud of his service, and is like, he is proud of his service because he is. I honestly think deep down inside he is proud that he quit and didn't go fight in Iraq. I think that, when he volunteered for Kerry and Kerry lost, I think he just couldn't stomach being in the military anymore because he went political instead of being a patriot. And it's just sad that a guy is that big of a liar just to be that much of a narcissist in his leadership style. I mean, he's such an authoritarian that it's just all about him. It's almost like all of us out here are just some weird little game he's playing, and we're pawns in his thing, like turning
And he's
the
got
dial.
that dial that he can just
Turn that dial.
Yeah.
I'm going to restrict you, and I'm going to let you do this, and and it's just I don't want to send him back to Nebraska, so I don't want Nebraska hating me. But it's like I don't know where the hell we can send him
Hey,
to.
probably Moscow or something like that, right?
I wouldn't even want to do it there. But
Well, I don't know.
like I told a group down home when I talked to him, my last 2 words for him was like, start packing.
Yeah.
Just get out of here, leave Minnesota alone. I mean, we need to get back and heal. I think. I mean, that's.
Yeah. Well, that was a good plug for Scott Jensen there, Hill, Minnesota, right? Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Hopefully this gets out there and people like what you had to say, because I agree, and I think 2018 you had laid this all out. We could have learned a lot from it. Not that I was disagreeing with you at that point. I was obviously not supporting Tim Walz, but I had no idea how bad this guy was going to be, and his record shows it. I mean, he's just a tremendous failure. So thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.